The thing about the quintet is that it challenges easy assumptions about Islam and Islamic history, both amongst the Islamophobes who are totally ignorant and have no idea, and their more sophisticated followers, but also within the world of Islam. My friend, the late Edward Said, read it and liked it very much, and he said, "Don't stop there. You've got to tell the whole bloody story." The story of the battle of Western Christendom against Islamic civilization. They were all published separately. Verso has just put them out in very handsome editions. The set of novels that has now become known as the Islam Quintet started off as an accident and as a result of war. It was the 90s. The United States had decided to attack Iraq for the first time, the first Gulf War. And I was watching television, and someone I knew very well started defending that Gulf War, and he uttered the sentence, "As we know, the Arabs are a people without a political culture." Now, this angered me a lot, not because I'm an Arab nationalist in any sense, but because it was factually inaccurate. And I thought I would visit Spain, talk to experts, travel around myself, and write a collection of essays or a short book on Islam in Spain. When I did go to Spain, and I did meet lots of people, and I traveled all over the country, because I was also making a film for Channel 4 in 1992. And I was really struck by the monuments. And slowly, the thought of writing a non-fiction book disappeared. I felt very strongly in myself that I had to try and recover that lost world, that it existed in Spain for nearly 800 years, the Arab presence, and that the only way that could be done was through fiction. So Shadows of the Pomegranate Tree, the first of the novels, became a historical novel explaining and revealing the characters who lived in those centuries. And it had a big impact globally. And my friend, the late Edward Said, read it and liked it very much, and he said, "Don't stop there. You've got to tell the whole bloody story. Just don't stop." And we discussed, and I said, he said the story of the battle of Western Christendom against Islamic civilization. That started, he said, in Spain, went on through the Crusades, etc., etc. So after Shadows of the Pomegranate Tree, which, by the way, had a huge success, that, normally these things happen or don't happen, but it was a huge success in Spain. And I later discovered that 800 years of history was taught in 2 or 3 paragraphs in the school history books, and it was an unknown history for many, many Spanish people. So the book took off in a huge way in Spain, and that sort of both pleased and encouraged me. So the next novel I wrote was the book of Saladin. Saladin was the Kurdish Sultan of Egypt who took leadership of the struggle against the Crusaders, the barbarians who had come from across the water and taken over parts of the Arab world. And so Saladin, who, by the way, also appears in novels by Walter Scott and that generation of novelists, became quite an iconic figure in Europe because they were intrigued by him. He wasn't what they thought. And he created a huge unified Arab army that drove the Crusaders out. Question was how to do this book. And I invented a Jewish biographer to do the book, in fictionally, that he would write the memoirs. And so that's how it worked. And people later said, why did you choose a Jewish narrator? I said, because the bulk of Saladin's courtiers, advisors, physicians at his court in Cairo were of Jewish origin. They were Jews. There's no big divide between the two. That was the same in Spain as well. By and large, Jews and Muslims and some Christians worked together. So the Book of Saladin emerged as a biography of Saladin written by a Jewish scribe who has the Sultan's permission to go and talk to anyone he wants. So that's how that novel came into existence. And the interesting thing about that was that Saladin had liberated Jerusalem from the Crusaders and said it must remain an open city. So state subsidies were provided to build synagogues and mosques that had been destroyed by the fanatical Crusaders. And he said none of the places of worship should be touched. And so they were rebuilt. So Jerusalem became a unified city, free to all three religions, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, till very recently. And the contrast between that 15th century transformation to now is quite striking when you just see the images on the screen of what is happening in Jerusalem, how East Jerusalem is being whittled away by the Israelis. So that book too retained, an urgency. And people asked me, especially after Shadows, did you write this with Palestine in mind? And I said, to be honest, no. But I wrote it with all such events in mind, because Shadows of the Pomegranate Tree starts with book burnings and ends with a genocide. But the Book of Saladin has got a happier ending because it ends with Jerusalem being liberated. But there's one, in the novel, of course, there are descriptions of Saladin's personal life, his huge harem of wives and concubines, and all that. And in the novel, I have some chapters dealing with the love affair of one of his senior wives for a very beautiful concubine he's taken on. This created no problems everywhere, but when I went to present the book in Istanbul, my Turkish publisher said, be a bit careful because the Islamists are going to question you about a few things. And just be careful how you answer, don't be your normal rash self. So I said, okay, I'll wait for the questions. And so the question came. It was not about anything else, because there are many other things they could have objected to. But the objection came. There's a question asked, in your Book of Saladin, you insist on the fact that two women are in love with each other. Where did you get that idea? So I said, it's a historical fact. Same-sex love was not uncommon in our world. All you have to do is to read the Arabian Nights. All you have to do is read the poetry of Abu Nuwas in Baghdad in the early period. It's all there. So, but I said, in any case, I'm writing a fiction, and I can write what I want. So he said, I don't accept this. I said, okay, fine, don't read it, don't like it. There's no point in getting too worked up. It's a fact. So he said, you haven't answered my question. I said, okay, let me put it to you at the simplest possible level. Let's imagine that you're a sultan here in Istanbul, and you have, let's imagine, I said, 50 concubines and 4 or 5 wives, and numerous others to play around with. Even though you're very good looking, I said, a striking looking man, be honest with me. Do you think you'd be able to satisfy the needs of all of them? At this point, the whole burst into laughter, with the women applauding very wildly. And he sat down, and that was the end of the debate. But the thing about the quintet is that it challenges easy assumptions about Islam and Islamic history, both amongst the Islamophobes who are totally ignorant and have no idea, and their more sophisticated followers, but also within the world of Islam, where lots of people know the Quran, of course, know the commentaries on the Quran, but are not taught Islamic history, and are not taught what that early Islamic civilization produced in mathematics, in astronomy, in geography, in medicine in particular. I mean, the first operations were done by Islamic surgeons and physicians in hospitals which would now be in Italy. And this tradition, understanding the history of the religion, was very strongly in my mind when I was writing these novels. So from the book of Saladin, I moved on to write The Stone Woman, which was set in the last years of the Ottoman Empire, describing the decay of that empire and what was happening to it. And again, in that book, you have very open and long discussions and debates. It's the decline of a family, a noble family in Ottoman Turkey, whose decline is a mirror of what is happening in society as a whole, and the beginnings of the rise of nationalism. And there are lots of stories in it. And in all these books, basically I try and force people to think a bit, about lots of different things. The culture, religion, politics, state power. And so that was sort of received nervously in Turkey, because it's clearly not the official view, but it did well. And then my Italian friend said, what have you got against us? I said, why, they said, you've forgotten Sicily. So I went to Sicily and spent some months there traveling again. Unlike the Spanish world, in Spain and Portugal, there are no real monuments of the time, very few. Not that they were all destroyed, far from it, but earthquakes in Sicily were very common. So cities were, destroyed and rebuilt, and there's very little left of the Islamic period in Sicily, but enough. And there was also very little material to read about I finally managed to find 6 volumes which were an account by an Italian, Sicilian scholar of the Islamic period, which an Egyptian friend of mine translated for me, got me all the bits I wanted in terms of the food they ate, the dresses they wore, the traditions, the customs. And yet the Sultan of Palermo also showed the great Islamic geographer, very close friends with the Norman king, who did the first map of the world. And that surprised people. Oh, the first big map of the world, in the 12th century was the work of a Muslim Arab in Sicily. And I said, absolutely right. And even after the Normans took over Sicily, what is very interesting, not totally surprising, what is very interesting is that the elite culture under the Normans, the language was Arabic. The tutors hired were those who were knowledgeable about medicine, law, astronomy, geography, mathematics, and that's what they were taught. So all the early Normans spoke Arabic perfectly and even dressed in Arab clothes in their courts till the conclusion of that period and the expulsion of the Muslims and Jews. And what's also very useful to know, that in all this period I'm writing about, basically the Muslim rulers defended the Jews. It's not that it was pogrom-free, but they were defended. They rose to their highest positions ever in Islamic Spain and in Sicily, where they were hired. And then came the expulsions by the Catholic Church in all these countries. So after the Sultan of Palermo, I returned to the modern world. And as I was writing about Pakistan in the last of these novels, The Night of the Golden Butterfly, an idea occurred to me. And that idea disrupted the novel, but I think in quite a good way. That it was based on the love affair of two Lahoris, two people living in Lahore, one a Punjabi and the other a descendant from Chinese exiles and refugees who had come. And that enabled me to investigate and write about a 19th century uprising that had taken place in the Yunnan province in China. So the book became embroiled. It was both a history of a Chinese uprising led by Chinese Muslims, but as a united front against Manchu domination. And it's a very interesting story, which I discovered as I was investigating it, and which many Chinese friends said that they had no idea that this huge uprising had taken place, that there had been a Muslim sultanate and a Muslim sultan, Sultan Suleiman, in Yunnan province, and the impact that it had. They were finally defeated. And I read in another book, a work of history, that Sultan Suleiman's followers were writing to Queen Victoria, saying, we've been defeated, we're being treated badly, and pleading for refuge in British India. The letter exists in the archives. There's no reply I could find, but lots of Chinese refugees did come, including from Yunnan, first to Kolkata in eastern India, and then to Mumbai, then to Lahore, then to Karachi, and spread around. And one of their heirs was a central figure whose name was Golden Butterfly. So Golden Butterfly is Islamic part of the quintet, very strongly so, but in a completely different location. By now, 20 years had passed. So the quintet, they were all published separately. And they've only been published as a quintet for the first time by Verso Fiction. Verso has just put them out in very handsome editions, hence this film. But there is a footnote. Some African friends then said, you haven't written about Islam. There should be a novel about Africa. And I did think of a way of doing this, that before Islam, when Islam went, converted people in West Africa in particular, but elsewhere too, the society was matrilinear. Women played a huge role in it. So I was really looking forward to develop the contradictions between the Islamic society in the Maghreb and Islamic society elsewhere in Africa, in West Africa particularly. And I was planning to go to Timbuktu to research, and they had amazing archives till the West, in its frenzied assault on the Arab world, decided to topple Gaddafi and lynch him. And all the friendship and solidarity that Libya under Gaddafi had shown to the African peoples, enormous amounts of money, sizable African population. Obama, backed by France and Britain, destroyed all that. So the huge numbers of refugees fled, some became fundamentalists, and Timbuktu fell to them. So this episode in history actually stopped me going there, since I prefer to go to places before I write these books. So the African Islam novel was entitled The Timbuktu Manuscripts, and it never happened, which I regret. But all the others are there.